My life had always been simple and predictable. Office work, evening gym sessions, watching series before bed. My name is Alex Wilson, and I used to think that this routine suited me. But everything changed a few weeks ago. At first, I noticed something that seemed insignificant: footprints in the sand near the door of my house. I didn't pay much attention, deciding it was just kids playing around or a stray cat. But the next evening, they appeared again. That's when I started feeling a strange sense of unease. The footprints always looked the same, deep, as if left by heavy boots, and they always led to the same spot. The last time, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The footprints ended right beneath my window. As if someone had been standing there, watching me for hours. Watching me while I slept. My first reaction was to convince myself it was a coincidence. Probably just random, I kept telling myself. But those words didn't help. The uncertainty slowly turned into anxiety, and the anxiety morphed into paranoia. I began noticing other little things. Sometimes at night, it seemed like something was moving outside my window, but whenever I looked closer, no one was there. Once, I even heard something scratching at the door. Instead of checking, I decided to stay put, clutching a kitchen knife. What were those footprints? Why did they appear near my house specifically? And why did I feel like someone was watching me? These questions haunted me, but there were no answers. And it was starting to make me angry. My decision to install a surveillance camera was spontaneous but necessary. The anxiety had turned into anger. I had to find out who was leaving those footprints. I wanted to make sure it was just someone's stupid prank. The feeling of being stalked annoyed me more than it scared me. The next morning, right after waking up, I opened my laptop and started reviewing the footage. At first, everything seemed calm: the night, an empty street, the familiar view of my yard. But then I saw him. A man. He was standing right by my door, motionless, like a statue. He wore a dark hood that concealed his face, but even through the screen, I could feel his gaze. He was looking directly at the window, directly at me. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was anger mixed with helplessness. How dare he? How long would this go on? I tried to pick out anything in the footage, the smallest clue that could help me identify him. But the camera revealed nothing useful. And then, like a thunderbolt, I found the note. It was lying on the doorstep, neatly folded and almost casually left behind. It had only 3 words. "You can't escape." My fingers gripped the note so tightly that the paper nearly tore. "Who are you?" I whispered, feeling rage override the fear. Why was this man here? Why had he chosen me? What did he want? I needed to act. But how? The police? That felt too obvious. They just brushed it off, as usual. I wasn't ready to be another weirdo, calling in with nonsense. No, I had to handle this myself. At that moment, I realized I wasn't going to back down. If this man wanted to play games with me, well, I was ready. But we'd play by my rules. I decided to take down the camera. Maybe it was all in my imagination. Paranoia brought on by sleepless nights and stress? I need to calm down, I told myself, trying to convince myself that these strange events were just a coincidence. I even began to believe that I could shake off this feeling if I stopped monitoring it. But the next few days were a true test. The nights were unbearable. At first, I only heard distant sounds, the faint crack of branches or the rustle of the wind. But then it became clearer. I heard someone walking outside my window, slowly and ominously, as if wanting me to hear it. One night, I woke up to a sound that made me freeze in place. A light, barely noticeable knock on the door. Too quiet to be accidental, but loud enough for me to hear it. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would explode. I jumped out of bed without thinking. I ran to the door, turned on the hallway light. But when I threw the door open, no one was there. An empty street, motionless trees. Silence. However, something was left behind. Footprints. They were clear, as if deliberately left for me to see. But now they seemed larger, heavier, as though this thing wasn't just a person. Something was definitely wrong. The feeling of being trapped was growing. My own home no longer felt safe. My bedroom, my bed, even locked doors, none of it was a refuge anymore. I no longer trusted anything. Not even myself. This can't go on forever. I kept repeating to myself, clenching my fists. But the truth was undeniable. This game was continuing, and I was no longer the one setting the rules. I tried to distract myself. All these strange events had drained me, and I decided to find something that would help me forget, even if only for a moment. I pulled out an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I immersed myself in memories, celebrations, trips, the faces of friends. It felt like a brief return to a calmer time when my world was simple and clear. But then I saw him. A photo from several years ago, taken at a party. It showed me, my friends, a typical city square decorated with lights. And amidst it all, in the background, stood a figure. A man in a dark hood. At first, I thought it was just a random passerby. But the longer I stared at the picture, the more convinced I became that I had seen him before. His posture, the outline of his body, even the way he kept his hands in his pockets, it all reminded me of the stranger from the surveillance footage. My heart began to race. Was it him? Or was I just losing my mind? I tried to remember that party, but nothing suspicious had happened then. If I hadn't seen this photo now, I would have never noticed that figure. But now, everything seemed different. The more I thought about it, the greater my anxiety grew. If it really was him, it meant only one thing: he had been around me for years. Following me. Watching me. But why? What does he want? And how long has this been going on? My hand trembled as I put the photo back in the album. I felt as if the shadow of this man was standing behind me once again. Getting closer to the truth brought no relief. On the contrary, it became evidence that I was caught in something far bigger than I could have imagined. That night was the worst of all. I woke up abruptly, feeling as if the air in the room had grown heavier. My heart was pounding, and my breathing was labored, like after a terrible nightmare. But this wasn't a dream. Something had made me open my eyes. The feeling that someone was standing nearby. I slowly turned my head toward the mirror hanging on the wall opposite my bed. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw it. A figure. A dark shadow with a hood standing behind me. I froze, paralyzed, not daring to even blink. It's just a trick of the light, I told myself, though I didn't believe the words. But the shadow was clear. Too clear. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight, illuminating every corner of the room. No one. Not a soul. Only silence. It felt as if even the walls were mocking my panic. Breathing heavily, I turned back to the mirror. And then things got worse. On its surface, faintly visible, as if written with a finger on fogged glass, was a phrase. "Do you remember me?" My breath stopped. My legs felt like they were rooted to the floor. Cold sweat trickled down my back as panic mixed with anger grew inside me. "What is this?" I shouted, not even knowing whom I was addressing. But there was no answer. Just me, my reflection, and those words. I ran my hand across the mirror, trying to wipe away the writing, but it vanished before my fingers could touch the glass. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would never have believed it. What did it mean? How could I remember someone I didn't even know? My heart was pounding so hard I feared it might stop. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a game. Whoever this was, they wanted me to remember. But what? And why? Sleep that night became impossible. I sat, staring at the mirror, feeling the darkness wrap itself around me more and more. The answers were close, but I wasn't sure if I could handle the truth. I could no longer stay at home. The walls that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a cage. Every sound, every flicker of a shadow threw me into a panic. But what tormented me most wasn't what was happening in the house, it was the pull. Like an invisible force, something was drawing me to the woods behind my house. It was an inescapable feeling, as if I had to go there to uncover something I didn't yet understand. I hesitated for a long time, but eventually, I gave in to this strange call. The night was cold, and every step echoed between the trees. The forest was eerily silent, unnaturally so. Not a single sound, not even the rustle of leaves. Just my breathing and the crunch of damp earth underfoot. And then I saw it. Among the trees, in the fragile light of the moon, stood a strange figure made of branches and ropes. It resembled some kind of grotesque totem, primitive and unsettling at the same time. Its shape was vague, but it radiated an undeniable malevolence. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it, a note hanging from the figure. It was tied to the branches with an old, weathered ribbon. My hand shook as I untied it. Written on it were the words, "I've always been here." Those words hit me like a bolt of lightning. Who has always been here? Why does this concern me? And why leave this message now? Questions swirled in my mind, but there were no answers. I hurried back home, hoping this was just a sick illusion conjured by my mind. But nothing changed. The feeling of being watched lingered. My rooms felt colder, more alien. The light of the lamps offered no comfort, only deepened the shadows in the corners. I tried to make sense of this game. A game where I didn't even know the rules but seemed to have always been a part of it. Who is this stranger? And most importantly, what does he want? There were no answers. Only a cold silence that filled every corner of my life. Each time I thought, maybe the next clue will reveal everything. But what if the truth is worse than the fear? I decided to investigate my own life. It seemed like the only way to find any lead. I opened old boxes filled with documents, letters, photographs, anything that might hold a hint of an explanation. I sifted through memories, dates, places, events, trying to determine if there was a moment when I could have triggered this evil. What had I done to deserve this? But there were no answers. My mind worked at its limit, as if trying to piece together a puzzle with 1,000 missing pieces. And then, amidst the chaos, I remembered an episode one had long buried in my memory. 10 years ago, I had a confrontation with a stranger. It was something petty and insignificant, a line at a store, a misunderstood glance, a few sharp words. But the argument quickly escalated into something more. I remember yelling at him, feeling a sense of superiority. The man was smaller and weaker than me, and I took advantage of that. In that moment, I felt victorious, though now it seemed disgusting. But the worst part was at the end. In a fit of anger, I hurled words at him that seemed meaningless at the time. "You'll never find me," I said, mockingly looking him in the eye. Back then, it felt like the end of the argument. He backed off, disappeared into the crowd, and I never thought about it again. But now, those words echoed back to me, like a voice from the past. Could it be him? Or was I just inventing an enemy to make sense of what was happening? Could it be my fault? Had that stranger really found me? The thoughts wouldn't let me rest. If it was him, why had it taken 10 years? Why now? And most importantly, how far was he willing to go? This was the only lead I could cling to. But did I even want to uncover the truth? Because the truth I was beginning to sense felt far more terrifying than any of my assumptions. I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. The pressure, fear, and constant anxiety were tearing me apart. So, I decided to share my thoughts with a friend. Jason was one of the few people I could trust. He always had a clear mind and the ability to calm even the most difficult situations. We sat in a cafe, and I told him everything: the footprints, the camera, the notes, the shadow in the mirror, and the figure in the woods. He listened carefully, but at the end, to my surprise, he just laughed. "Is this some Halloween story?" he asked, smiling. "Maybe you've been watching too many horror movies? This sounds like a bad script." His reaction upset me and even made me a little angry. I knew it sounded insane, but what was happening was real. "Jason, this isn't a joke," I insisted, but he just waved it off. The next day, Jason disappeared. The police started a search. They questioned his friends, searched his apartment, and checked the last places he was seen. But there was no trace, no evidence. He had simply vanished into thin air. It seemed impossible, but I knew this wasn't a coincidence. The following morning, as I was leaving my house, I found a new note neatly placed on my doorstep. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The text was short but as sharp as a knife cutting into my heart. "You're next." I felt fear shoot through every nerve in my body. This wasn't just a hint. It was a warning. Jason had suffered because I had pulled him into this story. Now it had become personal. There was no place left for me to retreat. This was a game. But a game where I didn't even know the rules. And now I was next. At night, I began to hear voices. They weren't loud or aggressive, but their nature was all the more terrifying. Whispers. Cold and intrusive, as if coming from a distant darkness. They pierced me to the bone. These voices whispered my name, repeating it over and over like a mantra. "Alex. Alex. Come out." I tried to ignore it. I covered my ears, turned on music to drown out the dreadful whispers. But nothing worked. They seeped into my head, my thoughts, my dreams. My room was no longer a safe place. The feeling of being watched had become unbearable. And then, one night it happened. I heard a creak, soft but unmistakable. The creak of the front door. It opened. At first, I thought it was the wind. But no, it was something else. There was no wind. The air was heavy and still. I was afraid to lift my eyes, but I couldn't resist. I looked toward the door and saw him. A dark silhouette stood in the doorway, motionless, almost blending into the darkness. Only the moonlight outlined his shape. He was here. Finally, after all these days of fear and anxiety, he had come. We stared at each other in silence. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My mind wavered between reality and horror. He didn't say a word, but he didn't need to. I knew what he wanted. He was waiting for the end. His presence made me realize all of this had led to this moment. His game, his rules. But what was the end? What would happen next? And could I stop it? In that moment, I understood one thing. There was no escaping him. And now, everything depended on whether I could stand my ground. That night, I decided not to sleep. Enough was enough. If this was a game, then I was a player, even if I didn't know the rules. I sat in the dark, clutching a kitchen knife, my only defense. Every sound made me flinch. The silence was even worse. It felt like the tense stillness before a storm. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker, blinking erratically as if mocking me. Then they went out completely, plunging the room into thick darkness. My heart was racing, but I couldn't move. Then I heard it, a loud crack. One of the mirrors in the room shattered. Then another. Shards fell to the floor, and in each fragment, under the faint light of the moon, I saw it. His reflection. He was standing there. But this time, I saw his face. And if I could have screamed, I would have, but my voice vanished as soon as I tried to make a sound. His face was horrifying, inhuman. His eyes, empty, black, like the void itself. His smile was twisted, as if carved into his skin. He leaned toward me. His breath was cold, like frost touching my face. And then he whispered, "You lost." My body froze, and my heart felt like it was ready to explode. Darkness enveloped me, and I passed out. When I opened my eyes, everything seemed normal. No broken mirrors, no shadow, no sign of his presence. But it wasn't a relief. Because when I looked down, I saw it. Another note. On it was written, "The game begins again." I sat there, staring at those words, unsure if this was the start of a new nightmare, or if I was already trapped in an endless loop. What was this game? And would I ever be able to end it?